do more good, have more integrity, be more useful, Don't use it as don't let this fear of the unknown stop you from being good right now.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Strong Stoic Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Tumblin. Today, I have the privilege of talking with Thuraya. Thuraya is the host of the Burnt Sugar Podcast, which I was a guest on just a couple weeks ago. And while I was on her podcast, we started talking about her story, and she actually has a very interesting and inspiring story that I thought was really worth sharing on my podcast, on the Strong Stoic Podcast. So I invited her on. She went from basically, she was born into a Muslim country as a young girl and went into a westernized country, and sort of that transition that she went through it's just very inspiring, and she has such a wonderful perspective on life. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Hello, darling. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. And I'm going to explain that intro. You say that all the time when you start your podcast. You say, hello, darling. And we spoke personally that we both come from small towns, and that's what they say in small towns. They call each other darling and honey and sweetheart and love.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah,
nice, right?
It's one of my favorite things. Actually, I had a friend of mine who used to just answer the phone without fail every time with "G'day, darling," and it just it makes me feel good. So
Yeah.
I just thought that was what made me want to do it. But it's just one of those nice small town things, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, when I was growing up and I first started hearing people say my love. That one took me off guard for a little bit. I was like, what's going on here? Because that's a little slightly romantic, maybe. Like, that's on the romantic side, when you got like 60-year-old women calling you my love and you're like 14. It's kind of like, okay, that might be a little bit weird, but you get used to those things.
Mm.
So great. Yeah. So I guess let me just set the scene here for today's topic. Basically, what ended up happening was I went on your podcast, which for those listening, I recommend the Burnt Sugar Podcast. And so we sort of just had a chat about a lot of different things, about philosophy and stoicism, of course, as I like to do and you like to do. And through that discussion, we started touching on some of your personal story and sort of what you went through in your life in terms of religion and in terms of philosophy and your, I guess, integration to the West. And again, I'm summarizing this, and I know you're going to clarify all this later, but sort of like, I heard you speak about this in that podcast for, I don't know, we spoke very briefly for about 5 minutes, but it was very interesting to me, sort of that story. And I thought that I get the impression that like you're really, I guess, really confident and really secure in sort of what you believe in. And I think you're a very, very strong person. And I think that a lot of people struggle with identity. People struggle with religion. People struggle with being a part of a group and a philosophy. And so I figured it would be really great to just talk about that and sort of get into, sort of the typical stages of going from like a religious, or not even a religious, but like an ideological framework, a dogmatic framework, and then moving and being integrated into the rest of the world, which is really, even if you're not born into a religious doctrine, you're still born into a culture that you don't get to choose and that you think is perfect until you go out into the world and explore it. And so before we get into it, I want to first just say blatantly that we are going to be talking about Islam in this episode. That's going to be sort of I guess the catalyst, the essence of discussion. The discussion is fundamentally against ideological possession in general, which does happen in religions. It does happen in philosophies. It happens in Stoicism. I see that as well. And so that's the first point I want to make is that. And then the second thing is that I thought it would be good for us to start with the positive aspects of Islam, because it's very confusing for Westerners, particularly because a lot of us know practicing Muslims now, and they're very nice, they're very kind, they're good people. And so there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of misunderstanding on on this topic. And I think everything has good things and bad things. And I also think it's good that if you're criticizing something, you should be able to point out the good sides of it, because everything is, good and bad. So maybe just start with, what do you see, like, from your experience? What are, like, the positive aspects of Islam? What's the beautiful parts of it?
Yeah, so in my opinion, really the positive aspects of Islam, and really it's not so dissimilar to most religions, is that the first and foremost, it gives you a spiritual connection with something that is bigger than you, which I think is a beautiful thing. I think one of the biggest questions that we all go through is like, what is my reason for being? Like, am I loved? Am I valuable? Like, all of these questions, there is a beautiful interpretation from a spiritual aspect within Islam. There's also a lot of the basic tenets are very morally good. Things like charity, things like being really just morally good, things like caring for your family, things about taking responsibility within the community. Um, these are all very positive, very encouraging things that everyone should really try to aspire to. Um, in general, I mean, at the core of it, I think most religions or philosophies, at the core of it, there is a very encouraging um, push to just be good to the people that are around you. And I think that is definitely worth mentioning, that one of the bigger things that I felt was a sense of community. Even when I was born in a culture that is predominantly Muslim, and Islam is sort of entrenched into it quite deeply. But I always felt like it encourages being close to people that are around you, whether it be just through the charity work, which is one of the requirements. You have to give money to the poor, which is entrenched in one of the religious holidays, Eids, which is based on the story of the sacrifice of Abraham and his son. Basically, the requirement is on this day, you sacrifice a lamb and you take portions of it to people that are hungry. If you don't want to do that, you can just give money to people directly. So there are aspects of it that are encouraging taking care of others that are less fortunate than you are, which is one of the most appealing things. Um, Besides that, I think anything that encourages you to try and seek answers, or at least tries to give you some indication of what your purpose in life based on spirituality, I think is a good thing. um, I think, my point of view, that's sort of the extent of where the good goes, and it's really just in the central tenets, which you'll find in Christian, that are quite similar to Christianity as well. If you look at Christianity, which is like, don't steal, don't hurt others, that kind of thing. I think where the boundaries are pushed within that ideology is where it really becomes a political issue. The sense of the religion, the boundaries are pushed into a political sphere, and that creates complications, in my opinion.
Hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting point, because I guess the fundamental one of the like core elements of, like, religion in general, and
Hmm.
most philosophies, is that sense of community. And that's like, we've been in tribes for so long, and that's such an ingrained element of human experience. um and so it's like, it's such a beautiful sentiment, but it's also like, it's so human. You know what I mean? Like, it's so calm. It's like you can't survive without community. Like, all of us, even introverts like myself, like, we
Yeah.
all need some form of community. And certainly that's interesting about the charity too, because that's such an important thing. And you could even say that that's the charity is a form of providing opportunity to those that are less fortunate, right? Because that's really
Hmm.
what you're doing when you're providing charity to those less fortunate. You're saying, here's some opportunity to help balance out, what would you say, the unfairness of your life, right? and
Hmm.
and, that, and that's always, up to a certain point, of course, that's a pretty good goal. And that's also a fundamental value of the West, right? It's like equality of opportunity. Like, let's provide people with opportunity. And so that sort of charity mechanism is one way of sort of facilitating that. Um, and and I think you're right. I think I do see those similar things in Christianity, for example. And that's a great point to make, is that there's overlap between
Hmm.
pretty much every philosophy and every religion. You can find some level of overlap, and I think that's because we are all human beings at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, exactly right. And on the point of communities, like you mentioned, I don't think this is unique to any particular philosophy. I think it's just a human need to not just be of service, but to belong to a certain thing. And that's another aspect that religion and Islam does provides you with a sense of belonging to something, which is, I think, imperative to even introverts. Or this is something that you notice even in lockdowns with COVID, is that you people are starting to feel the consequences of isolation. We starting to realize how important it is to us, even if you sort of take it for granted beforehand. You realize how much you actually need to feel that human connection. There's a good feeling that comes from not just being a part of something, but actually providing someone who doesn't have anything with something else. Like there's a genuine positivity that comes from that, which is what Islam does push for, certainly.
Yeah, for sure. It's a very beautiful sentiment. Uh, and so I guess just what I wanted to do was sort of start with your background a little bit. You don't have to name any details, but sort of like what what you were brought up into, and what were, like, as I mentioned earlier, I touched on this earlier, but no matter who you are, you're born into a culture, and you don't choose that, right? You don't choose what you're born into. You don't choose your parents per se, right? And you're always indoctrinated into a belief system and a value system, uh, whether you know it or not. And the only way that you can really transcend that, I think, is to leave home and see it from an external perspective. And so, I think your story is very common. Um, but what's interesting about you is that you actually left, and so I want to give you a chance to really talk about this a little bit here. So, what was the where was the seed planted? Where did you sort of start to develop?
Well, to start off at the earlier beginning for context, so I was born in the Middle East in Jordan, which is considered to be more of the less rigid countries in the Middle East. I think that's a common misconception as an outsider looking in, because it's compared to things like places like Saudi Arabia, that kind of thing. But it's a completely different experience when you're born into the culture and experience it as someone who has to adhere to um, basically the expectations of the society. Um, so I was born Muslim. I was raised with the expectations of a Muslim woman, which are entrenched in both culture, which is derived partially from the religion, Islam predominantly. I didn't really grow up in a family that would be considered to be, that religious per se, but certainly you felt the expectations that were pushed onto the family by the society that we lived in. So there are external forces at work when you're born into a country that's that small. And particularly if you're born a woman, there are certainly expectations of you and how you should behave. Ideas around honor, ideas around you representing the family name. You should not behave in this way, that kind of thing. Um, so I was born in Jordan and I was there for about 7 years. And then we moved to Dubai. The reason being is, well, we didn't really have that much job opportunity, and my parents both found jobs in Dubai. We lived there for 7 years. And then eventually we immigrated to Australia when I was 14. And this is one of the main points that made me question my sort of identity as an Arab woman, or my belonging to an Arab culture or Muslim culture. Is one of the, well, really the main reason we immigrated is because my father is not Jordanian, he's Iraqi. And despite the fact that my brother and I were born in Jordan, went to Jordanian schools, spoke the language, adhered to the cultural standards, there is a patriarchal system of inheritance and citizenship, meaning if the father is not Jordanian, the children do not get citizenship. To Jordanian citizenship. We're not recognized as citizens. So we're only provided at the time with not even a passport. It looks like a passport, but it's actually just more like a travel document that you have to renew every 12 months. So that is a problem. It's to me that was one of the first points where I sense a huge betrayal in that I am not even acknowledged as a citizen because of a system that is just doesn't recognize women's really identity or belonging to that country to the capacity that she can't even give citizenship or rights of citizenship and protection to her children. And that idea comes from Islamic teachings. And granted, I could have gotten Iraqi citizenship, but at the time, that's worse than having no citizenship at all because an Iraqi passport is basically useless at the time. It's actually more of a problem, if anything. Um, and yeah, so we moved to Australia. And one of the things that really that flicked a switch in my brain is that I moved to a country that I was not born in. I spoke English, but I wasn't really Australian. But that country, within 2 years, gave me more rights than my country of birth, which was astonishing to me. It's one of those things that makes you stop and think, well, how much do I actually belong to that culture? How much, I mean, if they don't even want to provide me with my rights of citizenship, let alone, if even if I was a citizen and I had to adhere to a lot of the requirements of being a woman and which are quite awful, to be honest, but I wasn't even recognized at that level. It makes you question, well, am I really, should I really take that on as part of my identity? Um, but I was quite young still, and when you're 14 and you go from Middle East to, and I love Australia, don't get me wrong, but this is a very small town that we moved to. In the equivalence, and this, I don't mean this in a negative way at all, but it's the equivalence of a small town in America. Mindsets are quite tight, but it was nowhere near as tight as the Middle East where I grew up. But I obviously encountered a huge cultural clash. It was a big problem for me because I was raised with one mindset and expectations of that mindset within my family home. But then I would go to school and I'd go outside and I'd see that these expectations that are placed on me are not placed on other people. And I couldn't understand why. And that is what started to make me think, well, I'm now in a country that provides me with the freedom to actually ask questions and really consider what it is that I believe. And so I started to do that. And I started to weigh up which option was actually more in my favor. And yeah, safe to say that Western ideology kind of won because you cannot argue with you're putting a culture that really tells you what you should be and what you should do and tells you if you question it then you're a non-believer and you're a bad person. Opposed, and on the other side I have a culture that says take your time and ask the questions and consider what it is that you want to do, and if that's what you want to do, that's fine, but that's your choice and that's your responsibility. And that's another aspect that I actually enjoyed more. I don't particularly think that an ideology that infantilizes people to the point of telling them if you even ask a question, you're going to go to hell. I don't think that's a very smart idea. I don't think that it holds people accountable either. There's a greater sense of responsibility, which I appreciate in a Western culture. In that, yeah, I'll tell you what the situation is, and I'll tell you what the consequences are, and you make the choice. But when you make that choice, you are going to be held accountable as per the consequences that we just outlined for you. Whereas that's not really an option because you don't even get to the point of actually making the decision for yourself in the Middle East. You're just admonished for even considering the possibility of making that decision. So there's a vast conflict in the way that people should live their lives. And the Western ideology is far more fitting of my personality and my view of life than the Middle Eastern one.
So I want to highlight something. I mean, there's a lot there to unpack. I want to highlight what you said about you not having citizenship. The reason in Jordan. So the reason for that was because your father wasn't a Jordanian citizen.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. So he was a Jordanian citizen. Did he have a Jordanian passport?
He wasn't he was Iraqi. So he had an Iraqi passport, and he basically, what happened was that this was at a time when Saddam Hussein was really kicking and screaming, and he was conscripting people, any young men, to the military. And my father was actually, he was studying in Wales at the time. But my grandfather died, and they couldn't. His family couldn't send money to actually for him to continue his education. But his mother, my grandmother, told him, if you come back, you're going to go to the military. And so don't do that. So the best thing he could do is go to Jordan, Jordan is actually a big hub for that kind of thing. Jordan holds a lot of refugees. It holds a lot of people that are in between conflicts, that kind of thing. And so in my father's mind, he's like, all right, I'll go to Jordan and I'll just live there for a while until this whole thing dies down. And then I'll go back to Iraq or figure out my next steps. Next thing you know it, he's working with my mom. They meet at work, they get married, and he lives there for 20 years and has us, and so on. But that was the main reason as to why my father was in Jordan. Again, this was not a choice, that he wanted to make liberally. He wanted to stay in Wales and study abroad, but political circumstances didn't allow him to do that.
So, like, I can only speak from my experience. My Canadian identity when I was younger was really important to me, and it probably has something to do with the fact that my family wasn't religious, nor are most people in the West actually very religious. And so again, you need that sense of belonging. And so for me, that was being Canadian, and even like an East Coast Canadian, or is the same thing. But really, what you're born into can sort of be part of your identity. Um, and so for me, it's really it's really hard for me to contemplate what that would be like to not have an identity with a particular country. But I guess for you at the time, your identity would have been tied to your religion.
I would say so, yes. Also because, you know, look at me, like even when I'm in Australia and I moved, my accent is a giveaway. The way I look is a giveaway. And, even now to this day, I consider myself an Australian far more than I consider myself to be Jordanian. But I still get asked, but where are you from originally? Which is fine. That's an understandable question because I think people are curious, particularly because they can never pinpoint that I am Middle Eastern in origin because I certainly don't look or speak the part. That sort of that characterization of a Middle Eastern woman is not one that I that I really fit into. So I still get that question, but in terms of I don't know that I ever went through. I guess I did go through a brief time when I felt like my identity was not linked to a particular culture, but that was very brief. And that was during the time when I was really just torn in between the two cultures. And I was like, well, I don't fit in here. And I certainly don't fit in here. So what am I? I'm just someone that lives in limbo. I don't really belong to anything. And to be honest, there's a certain kind of, there's a liberating aspect to that in a way. Particularly during the time, the mentality that I was in, it's like, well, after living in Australia for a certain amount of time, we would still go back to Jordan and visit our family. But maybe 2 years into living in Australia, I could see very clearly that I'm a totally different person to my family members who I was very close to in 2 years prior. But just that brief time in Australia opened my mind so much to new ideas that I could not relate to people that are in my family that were not that long ago considered to be my closest friends as well. But at the same time, I was living in Australia, but there's still that aspect of, because I wasn't born here, because I don't have the accent, there's still that underlying questioning from, people that are Australians, that were native to Australians, um, that is like, you are Australian on paper, but not really. So you're kind of somewhere in between. But from my point of view, for a brief time when I felt like I didn't belong in either, I felt like, yeah, but I'm actually taking the good out of both. I can discard the negatives out of both. I actually have that option. And to me, that's a kind of advantage, right? But I think over time, and it didn't take me too long, um, I've started to acknowledge that no, I do consider myself Australian. Sometimes I consider myself to be more Australian than Australians that were born here, because I've seen what the other side looks like. When you know what the alternative looks like, it gives you a far greater appreciation of the freedoms that are allowed or given to Australians or Westerners in general. So that's how I sort of reached that point.
Yeah, well, that sort of being in a place and not like sort of having that question, like like, yeah, you're Australian, but not really, like that sort of thing. Like, it's interesting because I had probably the most mild form of that. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it's very mild, but like I've definitely felt that lack of belonging for several reasons. When I was growing up, I was born in Nova Scotia, and then I actually grew up in Newfoundland, which it's all on the east coast of Canada, but it's a different province. It's pretty much exactly the same, right? And but the thing is that people like to feel special, so they say, okay, no, like we're not the same as the people over there. It's like, no, we're different, right? And so when I moved to this place, it was actually a bit of both. There was there was a slight reluctance by some people to be like what you said. Yeah, you're similar to us, but you're not really us. You weren't really born here. You're kind of, you're, yeah. But so there was a bit of that, and there was also a bit of it on my side too. Though a part of me was like, yeah, we're similar, but I'm actually from over there, and so I don't want to
Mhm.
blame it all on. I think it's a two-way street, right? But
Yeah.
that was a very, again, very mild form of what you went through. But I felt similar emotions in that, like once you're able to sort of transcend that, it it's very liberating. It's very liberating. But it like for me, it took me like maybe till I was like 17, 18.
Mm.
Like it's not a short journey. And I mean like a lot of times not feeling like I fit in or belonged anywhere.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask you about the transcendence of that. Because for me, it was like, for me, the trans being able to transcend your identity with a group comes through you being able to open the boundaries of the group, meaning understanding that you fundamentally share a lot in common with every single human being on the planet. And so your group becomes sort of this a larger group per se. I mean, we're all part of groups, right? You have your province,
Mhm.
you have your country, you have whatever group you're in, but we're all human beings at the end of the day. And I think one of the ways is to recognize that in between groups, sort of that shared humanity and like the similarities, like we were talking about earlier, between Islam and Christianity, for example, that focus on kindness and compassion and family. So like what, I guess in your experience, what was it for you that like allowed you to sort of transcend that, because you were pulled in between for a little bit, but then at some point, and this is a very very difficult thing to occur, at some point you realize that you didn't need to be a part of both or either, that you could actually take the good from each and throw away the bad. But that's a very difficult thing to have a revelation on, let's say.
Mm. Um, well, as you mentioned, this is not an easy process because, again, it taps into the thing that we discussed earlier, is that we do have a need to belong. Like, it's very uncomfortable feeling like you don't belong to anything. But then, and it took me a long time, and it took me a lot of exposure to ideas that I had to dig through and listen to people. that are far wiser than I am, to reach this point of view. And the point of view that I reached is, okay, so I'm getting, it's not coming from me. This resistance to my belonging to a group is not coming from me. It's coming from those groups. Okay. Why are those groups still creating that distinction that I don't particularly belong there? Then the conclusion that I reached is, it's because it's really just a form of tribalism, isn't it? When there are certain parameters set for a particular group and saying these are the requirements for that individual to belong here, but then this person shows up where they have a particular set of those qualities but not quite, and they're still happy and they're still capable to integrate to other groups, it threatens those parameters that that group set in the first place. And that's where that resistance comes from. So ultimately, when you start to see things from a more macro view and from a more compassionate view of like, okay, I'm not the one that's creating this resistance. This resistance is coming from this person. Why is this person creating this resistance? And understanding that, you start to be a bit more malleable and you start to see things in a much more positive light. And it removes that factor of needing to belong to that group, right? Because once I realized that this is just people who are quite vulnerable. And when they see me, they see someone that threatens their identity, it threatens their view of the world. And so I'm in a somewhat more favorable position because I don't have that threat. I have not linked my entire identity to a set of principles that don't really, I don't really conform to completely. Maybe these people do, but the fact that I exist to them is a threat. And so, in my opinion, I took on the approach of, okay, instead of trying to force myself to fit, just try to find the common ground among each group. And at the end, I'm really the one that's gaining the most because I get to have insight and access to basically just run any group because I'm approaching it with a sense of compassion, right? I'm approaching these people with a sense of, let's find the common ground, let's find things that we do agree on. And ultimately I realized, actually, I don't want to belong to a particular group because these groups have very set ideas on what is required for you to become a member. And I don't feel like that's conducive to my growth or my goals in life. I don't think that there is particular benefit to me in adhering to a set of principles that I don't think is possible for me to adhere to. It's better for me to be a bit more malleable. It's better for me to be a bit more adaptable because it gives me insight to all kinds of perspectives that I probably wouldn't have considered in the past. So when you change, it sort of came to me in the sense of, stop looking at it from your own point of view and try to look at it from the other groups, these people's points of view. And at the end of it, the conclusion I reached is that my existence is, if I'm being too aggressive and too rigid, it's probably going to make them feel insecure. And there's no benefit in doing that. It's better for me to be a bit more open minded. It's better for me to really strive for initiating conversation and try to understand where these people are coming from rather than trying to force myself to fit into a mold that I don't fit into. So when you sort of flip the mindset a little bit, it makes things a whole lot easier. And that's sort of how I reached that point.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like really great advice. I've been thinking about this a little bit, that what you said there is like, that is the process, but there's a very important precondition to that process, and that is peace.
Mm.
And this is where sort of the human psychology element comes in, and sort of the tribalism, because I've sort of accepted this myself, that if war breaks out here, for example, if war breaks out here in Canada on anything, politically or sports or like any topic, I'm going to be the first one they rip apart. And I know that because I'm not 100% fully a part of either side.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, I'm not saying that to be pessimistic or anything, but at the end of the day, I think it's helpful to understand for people that like there is an evolutionary psychological reason for this sort of need to become part of a group. And there's this. I just finished this book called The Painted Bird, and and sort of the painted bird is the name of the book, but it's basically what the painted bird means. I won't go into this what the book was about, but what the painted bird really means is that if you see a bunch of birds flying and you capture one, and they used to do this back in all the time back in the day, but if you take it and you paint it, so if you put it green colors or red and you make it as beautiful as you want and you set it back up, it's naturally going to want to go into the crowd, and the other birds will rip that thing apart.
Mm.
So even though they're fundamentally the same, just the appearance of something different is a threat.
Hmm.
And so so I absolutely agree with what you're saying. But I do I do worry sometimes on my own behalf. Like if war breaks out, man, they're going to be knocking on my door first, right?
Yeah. Yeah, of course, the outlier is always going to be the one that gets a spotlight on them, because one thing that most people can agree on is a common enemy. So if you're the one that doesn't fit in anywhere, and all the groups can agree that you're the one that doesn't fit anywhere, of course you're going to be the first one through the wall, and the first one through the walls gets is the one that gets beaten, battered. But from me and the way I see it, yeah, that's a concern. It's certainly a fear, but I don't want to live out my life on that fear. If people want to admonish me, that's on them. And ultimately, that's not a good way to live. Like, that's a failure on their part. Their view of the world is so limited. And by doing so, they limit themselves. They limit themselves. I think on the point of tribalism, I often get asked, did you experience racism when you first moved to Australia? And I would say, honestly, no. I have never experienced any kind of, at least not the clear cut kind of aggressive ostracization and,
Maliciousness.
act. Yes, it's not malice. I've had a few odd questions, and sort of maybe negative attitudes towards me, because purely because they just looked at me and asked me where I'm from, and then there's that projection of that identity and everything that they know is negative, and that's fair enough. But the way I see it is, even in racism, it's because for the most part it's a lack of exposure and knowledge to that other group, right? So I don't know if you ever saw Joe Rogan's episode with Daryl Davis.
Hmm.
He is, yeah, and he's the one who basically is black, and he took on basically a mission to sit down and speak to Ku Klux Klan members, and basically managed to uh, convert, I think, something like 200 people out of the Klan. And the one thing that I found interesting is that for the most part, a lot of the members of the Klan had never even spoken to a black man. Like, a lot of them would say, I've never even sat down or had a drink with you. I didn't even know you could do that. And I think that's where a lot of that racism comes from. It's because they're just so isolated and fed one particular idea. This is the group. This is bad. This is what they. And it's like, okay, but have you ever actually sat down and talked to someone? Because what you're saying is that an entire group of people is exactly the same, right? There's no nuance, there's no personality, there's no difference in perspective. Yeah, that entire group is bad, and this is the way you should see them. But the second they actually sit down with someone and they realize, oh, wait, we have a lot in common. Like, oh, he plays guitar and he likes Led Zeppelin and he does, he's pretty cool. Like, we could be friends. And then once you build that relationship, your brain starts to create conflict within itself. It's like, wait, but this is what I know, but now I have firsthand experience saying otherwise. So what do I believe? What everyone else is telling me, or what I'm experiencing firsthand? And it's like, that's the way I view it as well. It's like, I don't think that people are malicious when they ask these questions. I think they are threatened because it's scary. It's scary to find someone that challenges an idea that is so firmly set in your brain for such a long time. And now you're seeing this person, you're like, oh wait, does what else do I believe in that's not true? And again, it's that fear of not belonging. It's that fear of losing the identity that you hold, so because it's like a part of yourself, right? The second you don't believe it, it's like, well, what am I? What do I believe in? What is the truth? And that's a very scary place to be in.
Yeah, that's a great episode. I'm going to reiterate that. Daryl Davis and Joe Rogan. That was a great episode. And what he said, my big takeaway was, because he would talk to people and they would be like blatantly racist, like not like, hey, where are you from? Like literally, like they would say, what was one of the ones that they said, black people are murderers or something like that, or all black
Yeah.
people steal. Like it was something like that, and like he would talk to these people, and I remember Joe Rogan asking him like, how did you not like get pissed off and smash his head in, and he basically said, well, I didn't take it personally.
Yeah. Because it's not personal.
No, because it's really not personal, and it's like once you can like learn to not take things personally, which is so hard, and I'm honestly I still struggle with this all the time. No, because it is really hard, because you feel like when people question something that you believe in, or people question something that you do, you feel like they are attacking you. But
Mm.
like there's so many reasons why people ask questions. Like for example, you mentioned about people asking, like where are you from, based on your physical appearance, and it's like a lot of those people are probably just curious.
Yeah.
They're probably just curious. It's like, oh, like, they have different facial features, they have different skin color. Like I wonder where they're from. So like a lot of it is just curiosity. And and I learned this through I just want to give another quick example through when I was learning French. You say something when you're learning a second language, you say something and everyone laughs at you, right? Because you said something stupid or you mispronounced something. And so everyone laughs at you, all the French speakers, and you feel horrible. You feel terrible about that. You're like, oh my God, like I'm so stupid. But they're not laughing at your stupidity. They're
Mm.
laughing at what you said. It's completely unattached from you. But
Hmm.
you take it personally, right? So it's like, oh God, like I'm such an idiot, but that was one thing that was really helpful. That learning French helped me with, but it's a never going battle. I think learning how to not take things so personally. So like I want to go through in detail what that feels. So you're in Walmart. I don't know if you have Walmart in Australia.
Kmart. Let's go with Kmart. We have
Kmart.
that.
Oh my God, that's even worse. Okay. We I've been to Kmart in the US, and yeah, it's not anyways, I won't go into that one too much. So you're in Kmart and someone comes up to you and they ask you that. What's the initial feeling? What's the initial like do you have like an initial emotional response that's like, oh God, or is it just annoying, or is it, like what's the feeling?
To be honest, I never felt it to be annoying. I always took it as a kind of compliment that they're just they're curious, because for the most part, people never guess that I'm Middle Eastern. They think Mexican, Hispanic, maybe Colombian. Sometimes I've gotten Brazilian. Lebanese comes up a lot because I think in terms of Arabs, Lebanese have had the most exposure to the West because they left in huge patches early on and established a very firm identity. Um, but I never really saw it as an insult. Um, I think it's just curiosity, and I think it's health. And I'm really actually glad. I get, I'm happy that people ask me questions. I'd rather people come up to me and ask me a question than make assumptions about me. There's an honesty in that I truly appreciate. And on the point of not taking things personally, it often it is personal. It's just not personal about you. It's personal to them, right? It's everything. Like someone said this to me ages ago, and it really sunk in. It's like no one actually thinks about you as much as they think about themselves. Okay, and every statement that comes out of your mouth, as much as you want to think, and the fact that you take it on so personally really just highlights that. When someone is talking to you, it's very rare that they're actually trying to, uh, you know, put you on the spot. It's really just they reflect really their views, and they reflect their insecurities, and they reflect their perceptions of the world. Most people don't think about you. No one's thinking about you as much as you think they do. And I remember when someone said that, I was like, oh yeah, true. like, yeah. And if someone cracks a joke at me, I like to think that I have a good sense of humor. I appreciate sense of humor because I appreciate that humor is one of the most core principles that actually is like unique to getting people together, you know, regardless of where you come from or what you believe. Laughing at something is like the most basic human connection you can get. And humor is a really great coping mechanism for quite traumatic and difficult things. Like, that's why we have these icebreaker jokes. That's why we have these kinds of ridiculous bits of conversation that everyone can engage in, because it's the easiest way you can connect to someone. And so, like, in terms of like when people ask me questions about, you know, where are you from, you know, I usually always turn into a joke. I just say, oh, all over the place, I'm a mutt. And it's because it's true. Even in sort of, you know, in a biological genealogy sense, being born in the Middle East probably means that you're you're a combination of everything. And I have traced back my lineage, and it is true. I have Turkish, I have African, I have Middle Eastern, I probably have Jewish in me. And that's why I look like this. And that's why people ask me, because they can't figure out. It's just an honest question. It's nothing more than what they're asking. Any other information that you're trying to place on that question is coming from you. It's not coming from them. And it's just, to me, it's like it's a lot easier to just take people for what they're saying, not push the boundaries of the meaning behind it. Like, there's no point in doing that
Right.
unless you're actively engaging in debate. That's fine. But if it's just some person who's just, you know, curious about you, what's the harm? Curiosity is a good thing, you know? So just answer the question. Don't take it personal. That's
Yeah.
how I do it.
Well, yeah, and it's a great point you raised about comedy, because comedy is, from an evolutionary perspective, one of the ways in which we deal with difficult to discuss topics. You know, we all
Mhm.
know this, right? Like, you go to a comedy show, they don't talk about things that you can talk about with your friends, or maybe you can talk about it with your friends. Comedians will never talk about something that you can go talk to a stranger about. It's always like a little bit offensive. It's always like sort of crossing that boundary of inappropriate. And the reason why is because comedy through laughter is one of the ways in which we can actually deal with those awkward conversations and topics that we can't really cover in regular conversation, because it's too sensitive, or you know, people get offended or anything. So it's a real shame, actually, because there seems to be an attack on comedy now. Like people are like attacking comedy for being offensive, and it's like, well, that's sort of the point. Like that's the
Yeah.
evolutionary. Like, it's not to be offensive; it's to make things that are hard to talk about a little bit easier to talk about, so we can actually deal with the problem. It's not like,
Yeah.
by definition, let's be offensive, you know. And and comedians know this. Comedians aren't stupid. Comedians will tell. They won't tell a joke that's offensive, that's not going to make people laugh. The primary concern is to make people laugh. And how do you do that, sadly, at other people's expense, right? So it has to be slightly offensive. So,
Yeah.
you know, that's the balance. It's a real shame that we're attacking comedy. We need to bring that back.
It's awful. It's awful because levity is so important. You know, and it's like that's the thing. It's like comedians are professional comedians. They don't just come up on stage and do a joke to an entire stadium if they haven't tried it for a year. Like, this is not just like a roughly put together show. This is an entire show, and it's a body of work that takes years of putting yourself on the front line of people probably attacking you constantly. But it's like that's the importance of comedy. These are people that are willing to take the risk of constant nightly rejection on stage in front of like a bunch of people randomly every night, and they don't know what the outcome is. That kind of courage should not be punished, because at the end of the day, they're just pushing the boundaries of ideas, which is something that we should be doing anyway. And they're not doing it in a, again, they're not trying to offend. They're trying to bring up an idea that they figured out is on everyone's mind, but no one is saying it. And they try, and on top of that, they try to make it compatible and humorous and relatable to large batches of people, which is very difficult to do. And the fact that that is being punished now is absolutely ridiculous. These are not people that are harming someone. I mean, the attitudes towards comedians now is worse than that against dictators. Like it's just too much. It's too much. If you're offended by one thing, then you probably would be offended by everything that he says. Like, particular comedians are offensive across the board, but people are only offended. And I think Bill Burr makes this point. I would say, he's like, I would say a bunch of offensive things about a bunch of different people until it hits the point when that audience member relates to one of the things that I said, and then they're offended. It's like, well, where was this offense to against all the other groups that I just trashed? It's inconsistent. Again, it's personal to you. And if anything, that should probably bring up something in you to consider, well, why am I taking this so personally? This is some stranger on stage that's just saying a bunch of stuff. It doesn't really affect me. But if your belief system is that vulnerable that you're getting that offended and outraged by a joke, that's probably something you need to review. It's not on the comedian to stop performing. It's on you to review that belief system. Like, why is it so fragile to you? Maybe he's making a good point. And that's the
Right.
way I see it. It's
Yeah.
like, you know, because I think that's what's, again, it's what scares people. It's like it highlights how vulnerable they are. And because if you're that vulnerable, then there's a problem. You know?
Well, a comedian, Joe Rogan said this, a comedian only says something because he thinks it will be funny. He doesn't
Yeah.
say something, he or she. They don't say something because it's going to be offensive. Like, it's entirely against their goal. Their goal is to
Yeah.
make you laugh. So, like,
That's not their job.
yeah, that's not their job, is to offend you. That's like their job. They say it like, and this is an interesting, for people listening, something worth considering. If you've ever been in a circle of friends and you've said something, um, that you meant to be funny and nobody laughed at it, and that horrible feeling of like, oh
It's
shit.
horrible.
Like, imagine that, but like on stage with a light on you, with a mic in front of you, with your mom in the audience, and she didn't even laugh. Like, that's got to be rough, right? Like, it
Yeah.
can't get worse than that. So like, I'm sure we all can relate to that. I can relate to it quite a bit as well because
Yeah.
I mean, when you play with comedy, which I think you have to do, it's a part of being human. There is that risk, right? And I think
Hmm.
even, to quote another famous, Seinfeld said that, Seinfeld said, "How offensive can a joke be?" And he said, "The funnier the joke, the more offensive it can be."
Yeah.
It's like, that's it.
Because it's a higher risk, isn't it? But the thing is, like, honestly, like, it's such a powerful tool, and it's such a difficult job. People just think it's
Yeah.
easy. Think it's easy making people laugh. Are you kidding me? It's horrible. People, like, especially people who go to comedy shows, they want to heckle. They want to, like, make a point that you're not funny. And the fact that there are people who go through that cycle over and over and again and challenge that, they're probably a lot stronger than the heckler. Like, just on the tenacity alone to be able to face rejection time and time again.
Yeah.
They're obviously really passionate about wanting to make you laugh. They're not passionate about wanting to offend you. That's not the drive. That's not what keeps them going. But
No.
people don't even view that. Like, they don't even take that into consideration. It's always like, I'm offended. My feelings are hurt. You need to fix it. It's like, no, that's on you. You are offended. You can't deal with this. You deal with it. It's not on me to amend when I say. But it's like, I don't know. It's funny how the conversations are shifting these days. It's like taking
Yeah.
accountability for your own beliefs is like, it's just not happening.
Well, there's
Like,
always
it's on
someone in the
everyone else.
crowd. Like you said, there's always someone in the crowd that paid for a ticket just to heckle you, right?
Just a
Like,
heckle.
I remember Eddie Murphy said this. He said, even like after his highlight career, he'd be up on stage, and then, every now and then he'd have someone just be like, "You ain't nobody," and it's like, this is like Eddie Murphy, right? And there's this, anyway, it's like,
He's already made it. Like,
he's already
what are you
made it. Like,
talking
he
about?
literally is somebody. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's great. Yeah, anyways, I want to move on a little bit, because there's a couple things I want to cover here. I'm glad we covered that, though. That was fun. I want to talk about the integration of Islam in the West, to get to a
Mm,
serious topic. So, because this is the question, right? Because this is what a lot of Westerners are struggling with, right? Because we know in the West, we know a lot of Muslims, and we know people that are like really nice people, and they're really kind and they're really generous, and so we see that and we're like, okay, well, these people, these obviously Muslim, Islam is a great religion, and it's compatible with the West. Um, so I guess, to put it bluntly, do you think you can be a Muslim in the West, however you want to define it, like, or how do you define it?
mm. this is obviously a very complicated question. And
Yeah.
I think to start off, there's a main distinction that needs to be made. Islam is unique in its philosophy because it is not just a religion. Okay, it has a political aspect and it also has a social aspect. Okay, it also has a long history in warfare. Not, Christianity has a similar sort of history, but it's very fierce, and it's well documented in terms of the impacts that it's had on major societies, right? Um, if you're just focusing on the spiritual side, if you are just taking on the spiritual aspect of Islam, yes, certainly it's integratable with Western civilization, and Western and democracy and Western ideology. Yes, because even democracy and Western civilizations recognize that people should be able to believe whatever it is that they want to believe, especially if it relates to something that makes them feel a certain kind of spiritual connection. But the problem with Islam is that's not all of it, right? The problem with Islam is that it does have ways of basically, it extends past your relationship with God. It starts to reach out into telling you basically how you should live every aspect of your life. And if a Muslim decides that these are the aspects that they also want to take on, which is reasonable to do, because similar to most religions, Islam also sort of challenges the believer. Are you Muslim enough? And the way you are Muslim enough is if you take on more and more of the belief system. And these belief systems extend past the spiritual. So if you are a good Muslim, you would believe that you believe in Sharia law, for example. You would believe in uh, Muhammad being a perfect human being whose actions should not be questioned. And basically, that's one of the central themes of the religion, is that you are not to question the text. You are not to question the actions of the prophet. You are not to question or criticize the hadith either. You can interpret, which is the word that's often used. But one of the other issues is um, there's a reason why the word interpret is the one that's often used around the religion. For the most part, an argument could be made is, okay, so we can see that in the text that there's a lot of issues here. Okay, there's a fair bit of violence, there's a fair bit of concepts that are quite outdated. Why don't we reform the text? Why don't we reform these ideas? We know now that these are not ideas that we can relate to. We know better now. So why not reform it? The problem with Islam is this, one of the central ideas is you cannot change anything in the text. You cannot rip parts out of it. You cannot say this is not relatable, because the main idea that sent the religion to earth is that Islam believes that Christianity and Judaism were true messages from God. The issue is, because of Reformation, the belief is that now these ideologies have been contorted and changed by the hands of humans. So the only way you can keep the word of God true is by not changing it. And there's also the belief that Islam is the final word of God. So it's the last chance for humanity to save itself. So if you change it, you're basically changing the guide on how you are on human salvation, right? So the question of how well it integrates, it is associated with our capacity to make updates on the religion, which is not something that this religion allows for. Okay, that's the main problem. Well, one of the main problems. Okay, Islam, out of all the religions, makes the largest claims for itself, being that it is perfect, it is the most well documented, it is the most accurate, and the representative, the Prophet Muhammad, is a perfect man. He does not make mistakes. And so, really, the only source of error is from us, right? Some of the believers are too extreme. They misinterpret the text, and these are the ones that are extremists and they don't represent the religion, and that's the problem, right? I don't believe that that's the problem. I think the problem is Obviously, there are issues within the religion that need to be changed. There needs to be debate and there needs to be active change to them. We need to do something, either say that this is no longer part of the belief system or remove it from the text or whatever. But you can't do that because it's against the central, core theme of the belief system. So if one of the rules of the religion is that you can't change anything about it, you can't even really criticize it, how is it possibly going to integrate in any modern philosophy? This is a religion that was written in 7th century Arabia, 6th century Arabia. There's no way, there's no way any belief system that is born in that time and place is going to be compatible to every time and every place. But that's another claim that it makes for itself. It's saying that actually it's so perfect that if you just read it correctly, it can apply to everyone at any time. But obviously, that's not working. So, I mean, I would like to be hopeful. I would like to say that there is a possibility of integration. And we do see that, right? There's a lot of really fantastic people who are Muslim, who are very devout. But from my point of view, they are devout and good people and integrate well out of their own volition by actively ignoring some of the really terrible parts of the religion. It's not because they have a unique interpretation that's purely good, it's because they're ignoring the bad parts, right? That's the difference.
Yeah, there's a bitter pill to swallow with that, I think. And I don't want to
Yeah.
put words in your mouth. And I should also say that I'm quite ignorant about Islam, but we spoke several times on this. And I think the point you're trying to make is that you can be a Muslim in a Western society, given that the Western values supersede the Islam values.
Correct. Um,
Yeah.
Especially when you're living in the West, you're allowed the freedoms of the West. You're not being forced into anything. So if you're choosing to follow the religion, it's of your own volition. You can't really say the same in the Middle East, because not only are a lot of the belief systems entrenched into law, there's a there's a lot of pressure from everyone that's around you to adhere to those rules, even if you think they're wrong. And so you don't really get much room to breathe, right? You have to go along with the crowd. In the West, no one's telling you what's right and wrong, really. There's the law, which tells you very clearly, yeah, don't kill people, don't steal, which are basically parts of the tenets of the religion in the first place. But first and foremost, you have to adhere to the laws of the land as well, which is something that the Quran does instruct. That if you move to a land that's foreign, you are to adhere to the laws of the land, right? Um, but it's not the it's not comparable. A Muslim living in the West is first and foremost a Westerner, not a Muslim, because they are given the freedoms given to them by the West. And that is something that a lot of people take offense in. Muslims take offense. They'll always say, I'm Muslim first. Fine. But you're not living under Islamic rule. That's not the same life, right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's the thing. If you choose to live in a country, um, by definition, those laws supersede anything that you practice. And this, we spoke about this personally, and I tried to explain this in an episode once, and I think I did a horrible job. But very humble of me, right? But basically, in life, you need two philosophies, and this is very confusing. And I know you understand this, so I'm hoping you can help me explain it if I'm screwing it up. You need one that allows people the freedom to be themselves. You need one that allows for you need things that are non-negotiable. Do not murder. Do not steal. We will not tolerate this. If you do this, we will remove you from society. That's law. You can say, okay, that's the law. It's not philosophy. It is a philosophy. It's here's what you can and cannot do unequivocally. So you need that. You need strict laws in place. But the problem is you need another one underneath that in which you practice as an individual. And so you can still you have to be superseded by those higher level that higher level philosophy, which is the law. But you also have the freedom given by by that higher level philosophy to practice whatever you want to practice. So you can practice Christianity, you can practice Judaism, you can practice Islam, but it has to be first in line with that higher philosophy. Um, and the reason why you can't have one, and this is confusing, but the reason why you can't have one is because it's too damn strict.
Yeah.
If you were to say, like, I use this example. Should you get up at the same time every morning, 7 a.m.? Yes, of course you should. That's part of my personal philosophy is to get up roughly around the same time every morning. Should I go to prison if I don't? No, that's my personal philosophy. Do I think it should be illegal to sleep in past 8? Of course not. That's ridiculous. But like these are things that are definitely worth considering. And so I think that points to. Did I explain that well? Is that I
You
know you
did, yeah. I
understand it,
think
but
so. I understand what you're saying there. I think I suppose one thing to sort of the one thing I picked up on and I wanted to that I thought of is democracy recognizes the rights of the individual, whereas a lot of religions recognize the group. You're not separated as an individual as you are as part of the group, right? So your failure, if you make a mistake, you're actually, like for example, if I was in Jordan and let's say I was seen talking to a boy, right, when I was young, um, it's within the my not a right, but it's quite common that women who engage in that kind of behavior, regardless of how innocent it is, if it is perceived by a male in my family to be dishonoring the family name, that's an honor killing right there. So my behavior is I'm not held accountable for my behavior on my own in that sense that if I make a mistake, it's not my individual mistake. No, I'm also tarnishing my family name. I'm also going against the group belief system that you are supposed to be a virgin. You're supposed to be modest. You don't get to talk to men. I am punished for it individually, but the reasons for it is because you are going against the group here. Whereas in the West, if you make a mistake, yeah, we're considering the environment, we're considering the upbringing, the belief system, which maybe I was part of the group, but I'm punished accordingly by a jury of my peers. And there's an entire process for it. It's not just, oh, there's a law written in in a book from 6 years ago, from sorry, sixth century Arabia, and that's the truth. And now you are to be killed. There is no consideration of what the circumstances were. There's no consideration of individual freedom and individual choice, right? You have to adhere to what we as a collective decide is your punishment centuries ago. So I think there is a greater recognition of individuality in the West, more so than these kinds of collectives that form as part of religions, in a sense. I don't know that I was very eloquent in explaining my thoughts there, but I just came
yeah,
up with it.
no, I get it. Yeah, no, it's a great point. I guess one thing I did want to hit home, the second point that you made earlier, is the importance of an update mechanism. Um, so you believe that the Quran itself, as read, incites violence, and so if you were to live, and it's the same with the Bible as well, in some ways, maybe not as much, but in some ways, if you live word for word by the Quran, um, it's not compatible with Western values, and you're saying it's written in the foundations of the philosophy that it cannot be updated. And so if
Yeah,
you are choosing to if you are a true Muslim, which we'll define as living by the Quran, which I think is fair, then it can't be updated. But
yeah.
it's very complicated because it also has that law about you live under the state's law, right?
Yeah, but there's caveats, right? So if enough Muslims come into this country, let's say, and Muslim party was elected, and they decide, well, in this province, let's say, we would like to instate Sharia courts, and everyone votes for that, and it becomes law. They are now following the law of the land, right? So there is, in a sense, the Western ideology of believing that everyone has a right to vote for whatever it is that they see fit makes it vulnerable to this sort of thing. It makes it vulnerable to hijacking in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, that is something that they seem to be struggling with in Europe, you know.
Yeah. In England, this has already happened. There's a lot of, Sharia courts. I think a lot of them were illegal, really, but they're sort of kept underground and they convince predominantly women to go against their own benefit, to stay in marriages where the husband is abusive, to give up their own rights, despite the fact that the law of the land says no, you're supposed to go to a lawyer, you have rights, you can get a divorce, you can ask for a divorce without giving up everything that you have, without giving up your children, which is not the case in Islam.
And so the real, like, the victim of this would predominantly be females.
My opinion, and this is not, I'm not the first one to think of this. Hitchens said this, Douglas Murray said this, Hersey Ali said this. The people who are most greatly betrayed by Islam have been Muslims, because you know can you name me a Muslim country that has led the way in social reform for women or for gay people? You can't. Not ever. Not historically. Not once. Slavery. Do you know when slavery was made illegal in Saudi Arabia? It's in the 60s. Oman is the same. So to make the claim that Islam has a moral high ground, um, to me is a bit ridiculous, because regardless of how much you want to point to a book saying, yes, but God said that we are supposed to be good and it was hijacked, fine. But in practice, historically, clearly there is a problem. And now you can make the claim that all of these people have misread the text. But my question is, why is God's final word, this divine revelation, why is it so vulnerable to hijacking into committing really morally horrible things? And that was the point where I had to, one of the main things that made me pull away is no one could answer a particularly really good question, which is that the Prophet Muhammad is supposedly he led the perfect life morally. He is a man who conversed with the Almighty, right? But at no point did he see the moral implications, the terrible moral implications of marrying a child and having sex with her when she was 9 years old. How is that possible? Because at a moral point, it does not matter to me if, the excuse given is, well, that was the tradition of the time, they didn't know better. Yes, yes, but this is supposed to be the perfectly moral man, right? He talked to God. And at no point did God intervene and say, hey, by the way, maybe you shouldn't do this. Or maybe he did, and Muhammad didn't listen. Either way, there's something wrong with that religion, right? If you can't make that distinction, that this is truly horrible, then I question the morality from the get go. There's a problem there, and no one can really give you a good answer. There's clerics, I've heard clerics say, well, this was God's decision and God knows better. It's not even Muhammad's fault. Muhammad was just following the instruction of God. But it's like,
Then you're left
really?
with, yeah, then you're left with the question of why would God?
Why would God allow this?
It's yeah, that's interesting, because it seems to be that Muhammad is the religious figure is the same as the historical figure. Is that, and
Yeah.
the reason I find that interesting is because in Christianity, and this has been one of the reasons why Christianity has fallen in some ways, is that the historical Jesus is not the same as the Christianity Jesus. In that, one of the things Christianity tried to do, and we can argue all day whether or not they did a good job, but they tried to to do the same thing with all religions and philosophies do. What is the ideal person? Now, the way you do that, if you think about it, you don't compare it to you don't really want it to be a person because people are flawed, right? And so what you want it to do is you want it to be the fundamental values that they believe in. Like what is virtue? Let's define that, and then the perfect person would be those things. The Stoics would say wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. That is their quote quote Jesus Christ. That is their quote quote Muhammad. Like the perfect person. Um, and I honestly I never knew that distinction. Because that led to the downfall of Christianity in some ways because people would say, "Oh, Jesus, like Mary wasn't a virgin when she gave birth. Like that doesn't make any scientific sense. You know,
Mm.
Jesus wasn't white. Jesus wasn't this. Jesus wasn't that. Like what? Like it's clearly not historically accurate." But this is what people say. People say it's clearly not historically accurate. Therefore, the religion is trash. And it seems to
Mhm.
be a different problem in Islam in that it's not the historical figure is accurate.
Mhm.
He's just not an ideal anymore.
Well, that's the thing. It's comparatively, it's relatively young. It's the youngest of the Abrahamic religions, and so it is actually well documented historically. It's well documented that he, led. I think it was 50, campaigns of war and won them. You're not talking about a person who is really seeking peace. I don't consider someone who invades and murders, and not even murders, as part of warfare in the way we understand it, as part of defense. You're talking about someone who thinks that beheading is acceptable. Now, if you want to talk about war, fine. You want to talk about killing people in defense, fine. You want to talk about political motives, fine. But to not just kill, but kill in the most egregious way is I can't reconcile that in my point of view. In my point of view, there's far too many holes in this perfectly moral story, right? And for me, I'm just trying to figure out my place in the world, and I sort of I could no longer associate myself with something that I can't even justify. I can't explain this behavior, so why would I continue to represent it? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that there is a verse in the Quran that says if you have a fight with your wife and you need to sort of reprimand her, you should first lecture her, and then you should not sleep with her, have sexual contact, and then if she still doesn't listen, then you are to beat her. And some of the retaliation to that is, well, actually, beat doesn't actually mean that, what it means. It's a very confusing word. First of all, it's not. The word that is used is "udrubuhunna" is still the word that is used colloquially now to mean to hit or to beat. That's first of all. And second of all, you're missing the point. The point is, why is God giving a husband authority to basically infantilize his wife and punish her without even providing context as to, well, does she have a point? Like, is she even a person to you? Or is at any point when a wife is slightly annoying to her husband, is she supposed to be punished? Like, that's the problem. It's not the methods in which the husband is supposed to, you know, punish his wife. It's why is he given authority to punish in the first place? Those are this is what's it's like a lot of the time the debates are lost in the details of the interpretation of the words, and it's like, no, 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 you need to take a step back, and the question is, why was this instructed in the first place? Why was there any instruction that gays are to be thrown from the highest peak? Why is that? Why would God create people? Didn't he create everybody? Why did he create people specifically to be hated and punished? That's the question. It's not, well, actually, the interpretation is not to really, punish them, but it's like, no, 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 no. You're missing it. Again, you're missing it. We know now that these are people. These are people with a variety of needs, and you're punishing them because they don't fit the narrative that you feel safe in. That's not right. That's not how I want to live my life. I don't agree with that. And so, It's like, there's people get lost in the details to try and justify it. It's like confirmation bias. If it takes that much mental gymnastics for you to justify why it's good, instead of just taking the high points and saying, okay, well, why is that there in the first place? You know, I think that's an issue.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think it begs the question, like, at at what point do you become a Muslim? At what point do you become a Stoic? Because we have definitions for these things, right? We know what it is to be a Muslim. If we take the Quran, this is what it means to be a Muslim. We pretty well know what it means to be a Stoic. Like, we have lots of books on that. You can research that. It takes a lot of education, but you can learn that. But there's always a disconnection between who you actually are and who you try and be. So you can understand Stoicism and you can try and be a Stoic, but you're not going to be 100%. You're going to mess up sometimes. And other times you're going to blatantly not, you're going to blatantly ignore parts of that. You might say, okay, I believe in justice, but then when you're faced with such a situation, you don't make the right choice purposefully.
Hmm.
And so that's not in line with Stoicism, for example. And so it begs the question, you're not 100% Muslim. No one is. It's impossible. It's an ideal. You're not 100% Stoic. At what percent do you have to ignore before you no longer become that very thing? If you have Stoicism, justice, wisdom, courage, and temperance, and you knock out two of the pillars, are you still a Stoic? I don't think you are. I don't think you can be a Stoic and not value justice. I don't think you can be a Stoic and not value courage. So then it really begs the question. If you have this old religion or philosophy and you're starting to cut away from it, how much of that pie has to get thrown in the garbage before the whole pie is just no longer there?
That's a very good question. And what I'll say about Islam is the definitions of true authenticity is really it's total submission to the will of God. That's the definition. It doesn't say you need to think for yourself. It doesn't say you need to consider other options. It says you need to submit to everything God is telling you as per this text, as per the life of this man. And if you don't, you're not Muslim enough. Sorry, my cat is yelling at me. Can you hear that?
Yeah, I hear you. It's okay. It's all good. She wants to get in. She's like,
Sorry.
God damn, like, how come you didn't
she's
invite me? Come on. We have a second mic.
she's
Come on.
she's very needy. Sorry. I'm just ignore that. I would say though, the difference between Stoicism and Islam is that there are fundamentally different views of the world. Okay. The reason why I don't ascribe to really any religion at this stage is because I don't believe that an ideology that coerces people using fear is a good idea, right? So if you are someone who is believing in an ideology that really only encourages you to do good because if you do this, you'll receive divine reward in the afterlife, and if you don't, you'll be punished for all eternity, that's not indicative of an ideology that encourages true like authenticity within the individual, right? It's not an ideology that encourages you to figure out what your ideas of morality are. Stoicism doesn't use those threats. If anything, Stoicism has a totally different view of death, right? Memento mori, it encourages you to view death as something that propels you to do more good in your life. It's something that is not to be feared. Instead, it encourages you to actually take advantage of the time that you have here. Do more good, have more integrity, be more useful, Don't use it as don't let this fear of the unknown stop you from being good right now. Whereas Islam takes the opposite approach.
That's
So,
a wonderful place to stop. Um,
okay.
I wanna really, really thank you for talking. I know this is not an easy topic. Um, I'm I've never been afraid to talk about difficult things. I think that's people keep coming back and it seems to work. But I know this wasn't easy for you, and I admire your courage and I admire your strength and your journey, um, And I think it's a good. I think you're a good role model for people who's struggling with identity, particularly religious identity. Um, is there anything else you want to say? You have a podcast that is pretty fun. You had a pretty good guest on there the other episode. I think it was me, but I can't remember.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, just want to say thank you for even having me on. It takes strength from both sides. You know, it takes strength to even open your minds to the possibility of listening to someone like me. So I'm really grateful that you actually have me on in the first place. So thank you for that. In terms of anything that I do have a podcast. It's called Burnt Sugar Podcast. It's available on Spotify, and I have an Instagram page. But it's nothing like what I talked about today. It's
Right.
really just something that I put together for fun, and it's more like pop culture oriented and very strange. And it's more of a creative outlet for me. So I don't know that it's for everyone, but if you want to check it out, feel free. So it's available on Spotify if you want to have a look.
Well, I will say that you have a really nice accent, so I think it's worth it just for that. So definitely check it out. Thanks again so much for coming on. Until next time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.